Sometimes I design for enormous spaces. Football stadia. This is Take That's progress tour. This was at the Stadium of Light in Sunderland. 80,000 people were watching. This is the closing ceremony of the London Olympic Games. Here's Kanye West, watched by 15,000 people in an arena, and Jay-Z in the same show. And MUSE, again in an arena, 15,000 people watching. Lady Gaga in arena. Sometimes I design for opera houses. This is Wagner's Parsifal in the Opera House in Copenhagen, 2,000 people watching. Here's Berlioz's opera, Les Troyens, at the Royal Opera House in Covent Garden, 2,500 people watching. And this is a new drama at the Bush Theatre in London, Howie the Rookie by Marco Rowe, 80 people were watching. And the question I get asked is, what's the difference between designing for 80,000 people in a football stadium or 80 people in a fringe theatre above a pub? And the answer is, essentially, there isn't a difference, because the space I'm designing for as a theatre maker is the space inside the head of the audience. Back to this walnut. Shakespeare has Hamlet say, "I could be bound within a nutshell and think myself king of infinite space." It's a potent image. I think of the walnut when I hear this line. I think of it as a miniature model of a brain. It's small, it's solid, it's matter, it's fragile, and yet it's capable of imagining infinite space. When I was about 6, I used to spend much of my time in a broom cupboard, something like this one. And it wasn't a punishment. I loved it in the broom cupboard. I was my own queen of infinite space in that broom cupboard. I had books, I would read the language, I would create images from the text that I read. And because this was the 1970s, I also had one of these, a Viewmaster, a stereoscopic slide viewer. You'd look at these slides and three-dimensional images would form in the glowing red space inside that little machine. The slides I had were an odd ragbag mixed bunch, things that people had given me. There were polar bears, there were moon landings, there was Donald Duck, there was E.T., there was Tinkerbell, there was Star Wars. So this parallel world that I was creating in my little broom cupboard was a mixture of all the things I could get my hands on, really. And I wasn't alone in there. I had 2 brothers and a sister. It was quite small in there, and it would get pretty hot when we were all fighting over the Viewmaster. So eventually we got hold of a Viewmaster stereoscopic slide projector. And we were able to watch these magical 3-dimensional holographic images on the wall of our broom cupboard. We got a cushion each, we huddled in there, and we imagined together. And what we were up to in that broom cupboard was kind of a microcosm of what goes on in the theatres, the opera houses, the arenas, the football stadia that I designed for today. When I go to the theatre now, I go in search of that same sensation of being among a group of people, all imagining a world in their minds at once together. And when it works, it can be an incredible, powerful thing. Because what happens is that you begin to feel like you're part of a species that might just be fit to survive. Humans evolved first to feel, and then to be able to imagine the feeling of others. And because evolution isn't an inventor, but an adapter of existing faculties, those same chemical and electrical functions in your mind that take place when you feel your own pain and your own joy take place when you're feeling the pain and the joy of others. The same neurons fire. The same increases occur in the level of oxytocin in your blood. So when you cry, as you immerse yourself in the drama, your brain is going through precisely the same systems as when you cry at your own events in your own life. We have MRI scans, we have EEG scans that prove this to us. The Greeks didn't, but they sensed it all the same. They knew the importance of bringing an audience together to witness the tragedy of a protagonist in a drama. They knew the lessons that would be learnt by a community coming together, not just thinking, but feeling, understanding a lesson at a level more profound than conscious thought, at the level of empathy, catharsis, release of emotion together, and compassion. And I would say that the most evolved state that the human mind has attained is that of compassion, of understanding another's pain and another's joy. This is a wall of bricked up windows. This is my image of the inverse of infinite space. It looks real. It feels like someone's reality. It was the set design for The Master and Margarita, Mikhail Bulgakov's novel, set in Stalin's bureaucratic dictatorship. When you read Bulgakov's letters that he wrote during the decade he wrote this novel, you become aware, letter by letter, month by month, as Bulgakov did, that there was no way he was going to be leaving Moscow, and there was no way he was going to be able to publish his novel. There was no artistic freedom for him, and there was no personal freedom. The only freedom that he had was the infinite space of his imagination. In our version, we use projection as imagination. We imagine we can permeate these bricked up windows. We imagine that we can form a crack in the wall. And we imagine ultimately that we can bring the whole wall tumbling down. What happens when you project an exact image of a brick wall onto an exact version, a real version of that brick wall? What happens when you make one version fall down and the other one remain standing? What happens is that in your mind, as an audience member, you try to maintain both narratives in your head. You know at once that this wall definitely isn't going anywhere, and yet you're being told also that the wall is falling down. And the set design, it isn't that real, fake, real brick wall on the stage, and it's not the film of the wall falling down. The set design is the tension in your mind as you try to maintain both contradictory stories at once. And if you're sitting in the audience and you've been there for 3 hours and you're all engaging in this imaginative act together, and by the end of these 3 hours you've learned what you've learned about Bulgakov's life, about what it was like to live in Stalin's Russia, then that act of imagination between you all becomes effectively a communal act of compassion for Bulgakov, for his characters, for anyone who had to live through that period of time, and indeed for the fact that as humans we can be capable of this quality of compassion, and yet still, now as we were then, still capable of such brutal abuse of the authority that we contrive to hold one over the other. Kanye West and Jay-Z. When I study rap, which I study the way that I would study Shakespeare, I apply the same quality of engagement as I would if I was studying the texts of a 16th century metaphysical poet, because it demands that. Shakespeare, John Donne, they could rely on their readers getting the classical references, getting the references to other contemporary poets. Wordplay was a popular sport in the 16th century. And so it is with the audience of Watch the Throne of Kanye West and Jay-Z's audience. They will study the lyrics. They will get the connections. These guys love to intoxicate their audience with layers upon layers of multiple meanings. They require of you as an audience member to hold these layers at once in your head. This image, for me, is the essence of the Watch the Throne project. Two men at the peak of their creative powers, elevated on thrones, up there. We look up to them, we recognize their authority, and yet, as audience members, we're also putting ourselves in their position. They're still tiny, they're still human-sized, they're vulnerable, they're exposed. There are predators within these giant cubes, dangerous beasts, sharks. There's no handrail up there, they're 5 meters up. As an audience member, the design is happening as you hold those two perspectives in tension. The closing ceremony of the Olympic Games, when I was asked to create a stage set in the form of the Union Jack flag, my response was, really? Is that really a good idea? Do we really want to invite the world's athletes to stand in the open arms of our national symbol? I struggled with it. For me, the flag was an incontrovertible collection of triangles and rectangles. And the solution came to me when I thought about changing the material. What if it's made of paint? What if you can detonate the red, white, and blue paint into a firework, a celebratory explosion, which brings with it a quality of anarchy, a quality of the possibility of change? Back to that walnut. I've talked a lot about the response to design, what I think is happening in your heads when you're watching theatre. What about when you're making a piece of theatre? What about when you're building a design? It happens as part of a conversation, conversare, to turn together, two minds turning together. And it doesn't matter whether the conversation is with Lady Gaga or with a theatre director, the same thing is happening. Two people are entering into one another's imagination. And the design takes place in that space between the two people's heads. It's as if two minds are dancing and they have paint on their feet. And it's the traces that are left by the paint that makes this beautiful, fragile design. You then have to turn it into matter. So you make a model of it, and then you take it to the builder. And it's from then on that you need to protect it like a walnut shell. Protect the infinite space, take it on as a purpose, and get it built. Thank you very much.